Chapter 8, Devotional Paths to the Divine. In this chapter, I think you all might have visited one or the other shrines or temples or any devasthanam or any place. Wherever you go, whichever temple you go, you have a set of rules or rituals which are performed differently for different deities. When you have observed them, we have different times when we have celebrations at different places. Sometimes we call them as Jatra, sometimes we celebrate them as Brahmotsavas. So all these things are done specially for a particular deity. Let us take in Tirupati, we have different celebrations. When it comes to Bhadrachalam, we have different celebrations. All these concepts of worshipping God through different rituals, different ceremonies or different kirtans is being the legacy of various movements in the 8th century, that is the Bhakti and the Sufi movement. So in this chapter, we will try to understand the basic idea of how did the concept of Supreme God has got evolved and how did the society start to adapt to this one. What are the various factors that made everyone as a part of worshipping God, and what are the other issues that we have here. These all topics or the issues will be addressed in the course of this lesson. The idea of a supreme God. Today we have seen most of the different castes, different groups of people staying together. If you remember in the previous chapter, we discussed how did the different tribal groups come in contact with the caste based groups or the societies which are divided on the basis of caste. So there we learned how did the process happen for the mutual interaction between them. So from that, if you remember, we already discussed that the trade made them to come in contact with them, or sometimes conflicts also made them to come in contact with them. Now coming to here in this lesson, when we have small kingdoms in different parts of the country, they never had a common God or common system of worship. They always used to worship gods and goddesses of their own choice. They used to worship different gods and different goddesses in different styles or different rituals, to be perfect. Then when they are worshipping different gods and different goddesses, as the time passed on, as centuries passed, they came in contact with each other groups, and due to the town's development or due to the trade relations or one kingdom getting established into a larger kingdom, the smaller kingdoms becoming a larger kingdom, all these things brought different categories of people together. When different categories, different sect, different backgrounds of people are brought together, there are a lot of differences among all these people because they used to worship different gods, different goddesses in different styles and different rituals or different ceremonies were performed. At once, when these all were brought together, there was a lot of misunderstandings or difficulties when it comes to common. But the common point what they all advocated is that the human life has countless rebirth and rebirths. So these countless cycles of birth, that is you be born again and again and again, can only be eradicated or can be stopped with the ultimate devotion to God. This concept started to get larger ground as the centuries passed, as the larger kingdoms got established. As people started to do trade, people started to come in contact with each other. As the towns grew, different corners of the country started to come closer. The entire nation started to become a single kingdom. So different religious background people, different deity worshipping communities all came together and started to understand the philosophy of cycles of birth. So this cycles of birth can be stopped only if you have your ultimate devotion to God, and it also gave ground for the differences on the social backgrounds. That is, the social privileges are also attached by birth. When you are born in a rich family, you automatically get high social prestige. When you are born in a poor family, you will get low social prestige. So all these things gave ground for the people to think. And how did people react to this one? Did all the societies, because we already discussed that the smaller kingdoms were all merged in order to get established into a larger kingdom. Maybe one powerful ruler or set of powerful rulers made efforts to expand their kingdoms. They actually expanded in the process of the political development of their own kingdoms. They want to redraw the boundaries of their political kingdoms. The process of expanding their political kingdoms brought different communities together, different deity worshipping people together. So each deity is worshipped with a different set of rituals according to their local traditions, how they used to follow in their particular places. And the idea of cycles of birth, that is the birth, the rebirth and the rebirth, and the idea of social prestige were not accepted by all the communities similarly. It has been accepted only by few communities. The rest of the community people, some of them who rejected the idea, who are adamant with the idea of by birth you get some social prestige. So these people started to look at the other alternatives in the society during that period. So during that period, the other alternative which denied the caste based discriminations or which denied the social prestiges between the rich and the poor by birth is Buddha and Jainas. So now people started to get attracted towards Buddhism, which is preached by Buddha, and Jainism by Vardhamana Mahavira. So these concepts also started to gain ground now that there is life without the social discrimination also. We all can lead a better life than being a part of one particular society which breaks the unity among the human beings on the basis of their birth, on the basis of the social prestige. So let us move on to another place, or in the society the other part where there is no discrimination basing by birth. Like that, we got the ground for the Buddhas and the Jainas to gain ground here, and later people started to understand that in order to relieve ourselves from the cycles of birth, we need to believe in God, that God is a supreme power, the only supreme power which can save all of us and prevent from falling into the cycles of birth and lead to salvation. This idea has started to gain ground, which is explained in Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita is considered as one of the most influential, inspiring books even today also. What did Bhagavad Gita teach to people? Bhagavad Gita is a book which is a conversation between Lord Krishna and Arjuna, where he explains all the rules and the regulations before he goes to the war and the responsibilities of how a human being should be, and we should be dedicated to our work rather than thinking about the outcomes of the work and leaving apart all the sentiments to some extent. That's what I have a little bit understanding about Bhagavad Gita. So Bhagavad Gita's concept that ultimate devotion to God, surrender unconditionally to God. So surrendering unconditionally to God has gained ground because all the societies, all the different sects of the society started to believe at one point or the other point that we all need to break up the cycles of birth. The only possible way to break up is give the ultimate devotion to God. Through the devotion to God, ultimately unconditionally surrendering ourselves to God will definitely lead us to preserve us or prevent us from falling into the cycles of birth and lead to salvation. And people started to believe that in order to relieve ourselves, we need to believe in God. In order to make ourselves free from the cycles of birth, we need to believe unconditionally, surrender unconditionally to the ultimate supreme God. And people started to worship Lord Shiva, Lord Vishnu, and Mother Goddess Durga in different rituals, performing different rituals at that point of time. And as the time started to gain ground of all these rituals and all, people started to spread or add the local myths also for these Puranas, which are explaining about how do you worship Lord Vishnu, how do you worship Lord Shiva, how do you worship Mother Goddess Durga. They started to get added with the local myths, local traditions, the local customs of that particular places, where these poets or the writers started to register the process of how do you perform the different rituals in different situations or different celebrations. So as the time passed on, now the celebration process, which has been called as rituals today, are written in the Puranas. Puranas are also added with the local traditions, local customs. Now as they got added with the local flavor for that one, now people started to do for the local deities and the local cults also the same procedure, the same process of worshipping the God. So ultimately, everybody started to worship in almost a similar manner, like chanting of the Vedas, mantras, then singing the kirtans, then performing the various other rituals. So all these things, earlier it was only for Lord Shiva, Lord Vishnu and Mother Goddess Durga, but later it started to reach to the ground level, as the Puranas got added with the local myths. Local cults were also started to be worshipped with all the same kind of rituals which were performed when they are worshipping in the large temples, worshipping Lord Vishnu, Lord Shiva and Mother Goddess. As the time passed on, now the concept of bhakti started to get evolved and gained its ground completely in the mindsets of the people. The unconditional surrender to the God will definitely lead us out of these social barriers, out of these social prestiges, and make us free from the cycles of birth. That concept gave the idea for people to become the devotees of gods, which denied the caste basis. Any caste people, if they are the devotees of God, they will be saved. If you are unconditionally believe in God, God is there to protect all of you. This idea started to gain ground, and which has been accepted even by the Buddhists and the Jainas, and that's how the moment of bhakti started to spread each and every corner of our country. Now, the new kind of bhakti traditions which were evolved in the South Indian region, that is the Nayanars and the Alvars. Who are these Nayanars and Alvars? Nayanars are the devotees of Lord Shiva, or the saints of Lord Shiva, who advocated about Lord Shiva, and Alvars are the saints of Lord Vishnu, who advocated the preaching of Lord Vishnu, how to worship Lord Vishnu, how to worship Lord Shiva. So we have two different groups, the Nayanars and the Alvars. Even the lower caste people in South India also worshipped. They are either Nayanars or Alvars, worshipping Lord Shiva or Lord Vishnu. So what did they preach? The Nayanars or the Alvars ultimately preached that you should have the ardent love, the unconditional love. You should surrender yourself completely to God, so that you will be saved and led towards the salvation without falling into the cycles of birth, rebirth and rebirth. So this is the concept what they all advocated. And what did these people do in order to reach to the common people in every nook and corner of South India? They started to travel across different villages. As they traveled across different villages, went to each and every village temple which has been enshrined with the local deity, and there they visited the villages, they sung the songs, and they started the music. They started to teach to each and every villager the way it has to be worshipped, the way it has to be worked out, the way it has to be carried, the rituals. All these things are advocated by the Nayanars and the Alvars. So how did we come to know all these things? Because we have very little books which gives us details about the Bhakti movement. or the Bhakti traditions, the transformation which happened from 7th century to 9th century, that we got from the Tamil literature books, that is the Sangam literature books. From the Sangam literature books, we got the concept of love, heroism and bhakti. These three are commonly advocated by the Alvars and the Nayanars. So Alvars and Nayanars worshipped Lord Shiva, Nayanars worshipped Lord Shiva, and Alvars worshipped Lord Vishnu, preaching the unconditional love and surrender to God, which will ultimately lead us to salvation without falling into the cycles of birth and rebirth, which we have the basis for this is from the Tamil literature books, that is the Sangam literature books. And then as the time passed, the centuries crossed, that is from the 10th and the 12th century, we have the Cholas and the Pandyans building fantastic or excellent constructions of temples, and across the shrines they started to develop the people societies. They started to create awareness for the people in worshipping the God by building temples with their lot of interest and passion or love towards God. To showcase their love towards God, they started to build these temples, and the religious biographies, the hagiographies were also written during this period only, that is from 10th century to 12th century, which is the base for today's Bhakti movement traditions. How are we coming to know in detail about the Bhakti traditions, or the changes or the transformation of people from the idea of supreme God, of local deities, to the overall ownership of Lord Shiva, the same set of rituals followed from the top till the smallest villages everywhere, where we can learn from here. And these are composed by the Nayanars as well as by the Alvars, who advocated the philosophy of worshipping the God unconditionally. When you start to worship God unconditionally and surrender yourself, all your worries are solved, all your issues are settled, and the most important thing is you are saved from falling into the vicious circle of birth and rebirth. So that's how it leads to salvation. This is a concept which has been advocated in South India, the Nayanars and the Alvars, including the lower caste groups.
If you like this video, please give a thumbs up. Please subscribe to our channel to get more videos on CBSE syllabus.